Man, we are sick and tired of being sick and tired. We are waiting on an announcement on a deal to be done so we can know who's about to, what free agents we getting on Caitlin Clark team, who we gonna draft, and ultimately, when are we about to watch Caitlin Clark destroy these ladies in the WNBA? But this CBA nonsense has been going on in draft.
All of this leads to the larger question hovering over the entire situation. What actually happens if the deadline passes without a deal? That uncertainty is what keeps analysts, fans, and stakeholders on edge. In professional sports, unresolved labor negotiations rarely stay confined to boardrooms. They ripple outward, affecting scheduling, broadcasting, sponsorships, and fan engagement. Even rumors of delays can influence ticket sales or media planning because partners prefer certainty when investing resources. If no agreement is reached in time, the consequences wouldn't necessarily appear instantly dramatic. There might not be an immediate cancellation announcement on March 11th. Instead, the impact could unfold gradually. Preparations could slow. Deadlines for roster decisions might shift. Training camps could be postponed. Each delay would compress the timeline further, increasing pressure on everyone involved. And as the calendar tightens, options become more limited. That's why both sides understand that time itself is a bargaining chip. The league wants a deal soon to preserve its schedule and capitalize on current momentum. The players want a deal that reflects what they believe is fair compensation and recognition. Those goals aren't mutually exclusive, but reaching a compromise requires aligning priorities before the logistical clock runs out. Historically, many labor disputes resolve only when the cost of not agreeing becomes greater than the cost of compromise. That tipping point often arrives close to deadlines, not far from them. Negotiators push, test, and recalibrate until they sense that continuing the standoff would hurt their own position more than settling would. In that sense, tension near a deadline can actually be a sign that talks are progressing rather than failing. For fans watching from the outside, the waiting can feel frustrating. They see a schedule, a start date, and excitement building for a new season, yet they also hear warnings about potential disruptions. But inside negotiation rooms, this phase is often when the most substantive movement happens. Proposals get revised. Language gets refined. Numbers get adjusted. Agreements that once seemed distant suddenly come within reach. So while uncertainty still hangs over the situation, one thing is clear: the coming days matter enormously. Whether the deadline proves symbolic or decisive, it represents the moment when preparation meets reality. And in professional sports, reality always arrives on schedule, one way or another.
Adds pressure to March 10th as WNBA CBA talks threaten the May 8th opener. Okay, here it says the WNBA schedule is out, and on paper, the May 8th season opener should be a celebration of league reaching its peak. But behind the scenes, a high-stakes game of chicken is threatening to derail the momentum, while the league's heavy hitters, everyone from Angel Reese to Brianna Stewart and Paige Beckers, are currently keeping their skills sharp.
Now the situation reaches its real pressure point, and that's where outside voices have begun weighing in. David Sampson, former president of the Miami Marlins, has publicly criticized the league's negotiating approach, arguing that the core issue lies in how the deadline itself was structured. From his perspective, setting a date without attaching concrete consequences weakens its effectiveness. The league announced March 10th as a cutoff and warned that the schedule could be affected if no deal is reached. But it didn't specify exactly what would happen the next day if negotiations remained unresolved. In labor strategy terms, that ambiguity matters. Negotiation theory often emphasizes that deadlines only carry weight when both sides believe missing them will trigger immediate, tangible changes. Without that certainty, a deadline can start to feel more like a suggestion than a firm boundary. Sampson's critique centers on that principle. He argues that if the league truly intended March 10th to function as a drop-dead date, it would have paired it with escalating conditions, clear statements such as, accept this proposal by the deadline or future offers become less favorable. That kind of structure signals urgency and creates incentives for the opposing side to act quickly. Instead, critics say the league's message sounded more like a warning than an ultimatum. They indicated that delays might complicate the schedule but stopped short of outlining specific penalties or adjustments. From a strategic standpoint, that leaves room for the Players Association to continue negotiating without feeling immediate pressure. Experienced unions understand leverage dynamics, and many representatives involved in these talks have participated in prior labor discussions across professional sports. They recognize the difference between a hard deadline backed by consequences and one that relies primarily on persuasion. Sampson's broader point isn't necessarily that one side is right or wrong, it's that leverage shapes outcomes. Negotiations often hinge not on who wants a deal more but on who can afford to wait longer. By announcing a deadline without detailing enforcement mechanisms, he suggests the league may have unintentionally reduced its own leverage. Whether that assessment proves accurate will depend on what happens if March 10th passes without an agreement. but his critique highlights a central truth about labor talks: timing only creates pressure when both sides believe time actually matters.
Screaming, I agree with that. During a virtual negotiation session this past Monday, the WNBA delivered a stark ultimatum to the players' union. A deal must be reached by March 10th if the season is to start on time. According to AP, this isn't just posturing. With an expansion draft for 2 new teams on the horizon and a staggering 80% of the league's players currently sitting in free agency, the logistical nightmare of a delay.
The logistical reality behind the scenes is far more complicated than most fans realize. Between now and May 8th, an entire chain of events must unfold in a precise sequence for the season to start smoothly. First, the collective bargaining agreement has to be finalized, not just verbally agreed upon, but formally written, legally reviewed, ratified by both sides, and signed. Only after that happens can free agency officially open. Once free agency begins, teams must negotiate contracts with the roughly 80% of players who currently aren't under binding deals. That alone suggests a whirlwind period of negotiations across the league. Next comes the expansion draft, where new franchises assemble their inaugural rosters. Expansion teams can't make informed selections until they know which players are actually under contract and which are available. After that, the college draft must take place so teams can select incoming talent. Then training camps need to open, giving players time to learn systems, build chemistry, and prepare physically. Preseason games follow, serving as testing grounds for lineups and strategies. Only after all of those steps occur can the regular season officially tip off. Each stage depends on the previous one being completed. It's like a row of dominoes arranged in a strict order. If the first doesn't fall, none of the others can move. Without a finalized CBA, there's no salary cap framework. Without that framework, teams can't negotiate contracts. Without contracts, drafts can't proceed properly. Without drafts, rosters remain incomplete. Without rosters, training camps can't function. The entire schedule is a tightly synchronized operation designed months in advance. This is why league officials emphasized March 10th as a hard deadline. It isn't simply about applying pressure, it's about math. There are only so many weeks between early March and early May. Legal reviews take time. Contract negotiations take time. Travel planning, marketing campaigns, and broadcast coordination all require lead time. If the agreement isn't finalized soon, the calendar physically runs out of space to fit everything in. So when observers hear executives talk about urgency, it isn't just rhetoric. It reflects a logistical truth: professional sports seasons are complex productions, and even a short delay at the start can cascade into major scheduling disruptions. The system only works if each piece falls into place exactly when it's supposed to.
The commissioner and however else you want to say that the NBA is not involved with the WNBA, you're just wrong. WNBA has a deadline now of March 10th. That is only right now 2 weeks away. And the deadline, according to the WNBA management, is that a collective bargaining agreement must be agreed to by that day, or the 2026 schedule will be impacted.
What Sampson describes reflects a classic negotiating tactic used across multiple professional leagues. Effective leverage, he argues, comes from attaching escalating consequences to delays so that waiting becomes costly for the other side. In that model, every day past the deadline slightly worsens the offer on the table. The goal isn't punishment for its own sake, it's demonstration. When negotiators see that timelines are enforced consistently, they start to treat those timelines as real constraints rather than flexible suggestions. He has pointed to examples from his own executive career to illustrate how this works in practice. Contract discussions with players would sometimes reach a standstill, at which point he would present a firm timetable, accept the offer by a certain date or the financial terms decrease. If the deadline passed, the reduction actually happened. When agents realized that the conditions weren't bluffing tactics but genuine policy, behavior changed. Future negotiations moved faster because participants understood that waiting carried measurable costs. In the current situation, critics say the league hasn't taken that step. March 10th was announced as an important date, yet there's no public indication that the proposal available on March 11th would differ from the one offered on March 9th. Without that difference, the incentive structure shifts. From the union's perspective, there's little reason to rush if the same deal remains accessible after the deadline. Negotiators often slow down intentionally when they sense the opposing side is more eager to finalize terms. This dynamic doesn't mean an agreement won't happen. Labor deals frequently come together at the last minute precisely because both sides use time strategically. But it does shape how urgency is perceived. If one side believes the other is bluffing about its timeline, negotiations can stretch longer than expected. That's why deadlines in high-stakes bargaining are usually paired with explicit next steps, lockouts, revised offers, or procedural changes that signal seriousness. Right now, observers are watching closely to see whether March 10th functions as a real turning point or simply another marker in an ongoing process. The answer will reveal a great deal about how much leverage each side truly holds and how willing they are to use it.
ESPN, and I smiled. Do you think that's leverage of any kind? Hey, your season may be impacted. It may be shorter. It may go longer if they do what MLB did at the last CBA, where they, in a random, self-imposed deadline and the concomitant threats, the WNBA Players Association couldn't be more correct. If you are going to set a deadline for a negotiation, this is how I was taught to set a deadline. You say to a person that if we don't have an agreement,
the spotlight everyone keeps referencing isn't hypothetical, it's massive, measurable, and impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark didn't merely attract attention last season, she generated a level of viewership and engagement that shattered benchmarks the league had spent decades trying to reach. Games featuring her routinely posted ratings figures that hadn't been seen in years. Merchandise demand surged at unprecedented speed. Attendance records fell in arena after arena as crowds packed seats not just for rivalry matchups but specifically to watch her play. This wasn't slow, organic growth that analysts could attribute to gradual marketing improvements. It resembled a sudden surge, the kind that transforms a sports league's visibility almost overnight. That surge is exactly why the current CBA stalemate is viewed as so risky. Momentum in sports is fragile. When a league finally captures mainstream attention, it has a narrow window to convert curiosity into long-term loyalty. Casual viewers who tuned in for the first time last season did so because something felt new and exciting. If those same viewers expect to see that excitement continue on May 8th and instead find empty airtime or postpone games, many of them won't stick around waiting for labor disputes to resolve. Sports history shows this pattern repeatedly. Audiences drawn in during a breakout moment often drift away quickly if continuity is interrupted. From a business perspective, that makes the present situation uniquely high stakes. The league isn't negotiating from a position of obscurity anymore, it's negotiating during a period of peak visibility. Sponsors have taken notice. Media outlets are paying closer attention. Social media engagement has climbed. All of those indicators suggest that the product is hotter than it has ever been. But heightened attention also raises expectations. Fans who just discovered the league want consistency, not uncertainty. That's why executives and players alike understand what's on the line. This isn't just about salary structures or revenue percentages. It's about timing. When a league finally reaches a moment where public interest, star power, and financial opportunity align, missing that window can be costly. Momentum doesn't wait. It either gets captured and built upon, or it fades as audiences move on to the next spectacle competing for their attention. And right now, with negotiations unresolved, that risk feels very real.